We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Beis and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 18b. This Daf is sponsored by Alexander Rosenfeld. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amar or Daf, see the description box below, and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amar, the Gemara was discussing the Machlokas Amuroim between Abaye and Rava. Is a person allowed to take a mazik, something that's going to do damage to his neighbor, and put it right up against the boundary of his property, right up against the boundary by the neighbor's property? Let's say the neighbor doesn't have anything there yet that will be damaged. There is nothing that is a nizik that is present yet in the neighbor's property. And Abaye says that's fine. You can be somech all the way up to the boundary, right up next to the neighbor's property, because there's nothing there being damaged at the moment. But Rava is strict, and Rava says, no, you're not allowed to go right up to the property. You still have to distance yourself in case the neighbor puts something there that will be damaged. And the Gemara brought a proof from a Mishnah later on, and in the Mishnah it's discussing a situation of chardal and devorim, a situation of mustards and that are doing damage to the neighbor's bees. The case over there is that the bees eat the mustard, and that causes them to become hungry, and they end up eating up all the honey, so that causes damage to the person who has the bees. And it's also discussing a case of mishra and yarka, that's the water that's soaking the flax, that causes damage to the yarka, to the vegetables. And the Tanakama in that Mishnah says that they have to distance. Those who are doing the damage have to distance. But Rabbi Yossi says, no, in the situation of the chardal, there's no need to distance the chardal, because the person who owns that mustard can say, just like my mustard is damaging your devorim, but your devorim are also damaging my mustard, so I have no responsibility to distance myself. And so the Gemara now continues its proof, and the proof is being brought from Rabbi Yossi. V'ida lo samech. Now, if a person is not allowed to go right up to the boundary when there is no nizik over there, he's still not allowed to do that. So hechi mashkachas la, how does this discussion even start? How does what Rabbi Yossi is saying even make any sense? And Rashi explains, V'ilo samech inish hezek lemeitzer chaver. If a person is not allowed to put something that's going to do damage right up against the border, the boundary of his neighbor's property, afilu b'she'ein sham davar hanizik, he's not allowed to do that even if there's nothing there being damaged. Islay Rabbi Yossi, if that's what Rabbi Yossi held, the elu shneim mazikin hein. So over here, both again the chardal and the devorim are considered to be mazikin. They both do damage to one another. So hechi mashkachas le delismo chad minayo bereisha. So how is it that one of them ever in the first place even put their item right up against the boundary? Harei chaveru ma'akev, all of the neighbors able to stop him. In other words, there's nothing that could start this discussion. How could the person say, let's say the person who owns the chardal, how can he say that my chardal, why should I have to move it? Because your devorim are also doing damage to my chardal, but his chardal never should have been there in the first place, even if there were no devorim, if Rabbi Yossi held like Rava that you're not allowed to be somech. And so therefore what Rabbi Yossi is saying doesn't even make any sense if you're not allowed to be somech. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rapapa. Rapapa says, Belokeach, this is the same Rapapa we brought in the previous Amud. Rapapa says, no, what we're talking about in the Mishnah is a situation of a buyer. And Rashi explains, Belokeach, Achar sha'asa zeh mishra besoch sadeyu, meaning after this person, he set up this water soaking the flax in his field. Ozara sham chardal, he planted some mustard, and it was completely done in a permissible fashion. But then machar mechza sadeyu, but then he sold half of his field Achar to somebody else. V'halokeach, and then the buyer Zara sham yerek, he planted there some vegetables which now are being damaged. Ohamid devorim, or he put the bees over there again, which are being damaged. And so the person actually was there in a perfectly permissible fashion. And Rabbi Yossi is saying, the owner of the chardal now says, now that there's something being damaged, the owner of the chardal says, well, just like I'm damaging you, you're also damaging me. Why should I have to move? But the Gemara continues, but if we're talking about a buyer, my time of the Rabbanan, then what would be the reason of the Rabbanan? The person was there in a completely permissible fashion. Why should he have to move? And further, my time with the Rabbi Yossi, we also don't understand Rabbi Yossi. What's the reason of Rabbi Yossi? Afilu mishra v'yarkanami. Why is he only saying that the person who owns the chardal doesn't have to move? Also, by the case of the mishra and yarka, the person who owns the mishra has the same argument. He was there in a permissible fashion. And the Gemara says, Amar Ravina says, Kasavri Rabbanan, the Rabbanan hold, al hamazik laharchek esatzmo. The Rabbanan hold that the mazik always has to distance himself, regardless, even if he was originally there in a permissible fashion. But the Gemara says, Mechlal, but that would imply the Rabbi Yossi savar ala nizik laharchek esatzmo, that Rabbi Yossi holds that the nizik, the one being damaged, also always has to distance himself. But iyala nizik, but if it's the nizik that has to distance himself, afilu mishra v'yarkanami, then again we're back to the question of, even in the case of the mishra and yarka, why should the person with the mishra, why should the mazik have to distance himself? Let the person being damaged distance himself. And so the Gemara says, Eloliolim Rabbi Yossi nami ala mazik svirle. Rather, you have to say, Rabbi Yossi agrees also that the mazik is the one that has to distance himself. V'hachi kamar lahu Rabbi Yossi l'Rabbanan. But what Rabbi Yossi is saying to the Rabbanan is as follows: Teinach Mishra v'Yarka. I understand by the case of the Mishra and Yarka, the Hani Maskihani v'Hani lo Maskihani, the Mishra is doing damage to the Yerek, the Yerek is not doing any damage to the Mishra, so it makes sense, you say the Mazik has the distance. El Chardalu Devorim, but by the case of the Chardal and the Devorim, Tarvayu Maskihadadi, they're both damaging each other. Why should you say the person who owns the Chardal has to move? And the Gemara says v'Rabbanan, but the Rabbanan respond, Devorim lechardal lo Maskile. It's not true. The Devorim don't damage the Chardal. Ibevinsa, if you're talking about the seeds, the mustard seeds, lo mashkechole, the Devorim can't find, they can't access those seeds. And Ibetarfa, if you're talking about the leaves, hadar pari, they'll grow again. That's not real damage. But the Gemara continues, V'savar Rabbi Yossi ala mazik laharchik es atzmo. Does Rabbi Yossi really hold that the mazik has to distance himself? But we learned in the Mishnah later on, Rabbi Yossi says, Afal pisha habor kodemis le'ilan, even though the pit was there before the tree, lo yakotz, he does not have to cut down his tree. Shezeh chover b'soch shelo, because this one can dig within his own property. V'zenoteya b'soch shelo, and this person can plant within his own property. And so here you see that according to Rabbi Yossi, the mazik does not have to distance himself. And so the Gemara says, rather, we'll really say that Rabbi Yossi holds that it's the nizik, the one who's being damaged, that has to distance himself. And what is Rabbi Yossi exactly responding by the chardal? He should say by all the cases the mazik doesn't need to distance himself. And the answer to that is v'ledivreim d'Rabbanan k'amar lahu. He's speaking according to the position of the Rabbanan. He's saying as follows: Lididi, according to me, al hanizik laharchik es atzmo. It's the nizik that has to distance himself. Ve'afilu mishra v'yarka lo boy. Even by the case of Mishra and Yarka, he does not need to distance himself. But according to you, the amrisu al hamazik, that you say it's the mazik that needs to distance himself, teinach Mishra v'Yarka, I understand by the case of the Mishra and the Yarka, the hani maskihani v'hani lo maskihani, these do damage to those, but those don't do damage to these. Elacharlu devorim, but by the case of the mustard and the bees, tarvayu maskihadadi, don't they both damage one another? So why are you saying over there that they have to move? So he's saying again, lidivreim d'Rabbanan, he's saying according to me, of course there's no need to distance oneself at all, but even according to you, you should at least admit in the situation of the chardal. And the Gemara says, the Rabbanan respond to that, devorim lechardal lo maskile, again, the bees do not damage the mustard, ibevins, if we're talking about the seeds. And Rashi explains, ala mazik laharchik es atzmo, again, it's the mazik that has the distance, and the point here is, v'afa pisha mitchila asa b'reshus, even if originally he was there with permission, still the mazik has to distance oneself according to that opinion, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Tes Amud Aleph.